What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of Culture Bust. I've got one of the most exciting guests I've ever had. He's somebody that I follow, and he's a good friend of mine actually from college, and I can't wait to introduce to you Joe Byerly. So Joe Byerly is an active duty officer in the Army. He's recently served as a special advisor within U.S. Special Operations Command. He's the recipient of a Purple Heart, Bronze Star. He's had numerous tours overseas. He's a contributing writer to Winning at Westeros. Really, really cool story behind that. He's the founder of a widely viewed blog, From the Green Notebook, which everyone on here should be following for leadership tips. It has an emphasis on military leadership and professional development. And Joe's going to be talking to us today about reading and journaling for professional growth. Joe, welcome to the show, my man.
What's up, Drew? Thanks for having me, buddy. It's good seeing you again.
You too as well. I'm like really elated to have you on the show. I think the audience today will have an opportunity to really garnish some neat perspective from somebody that's got a ton of leadership experience in the military as yourself, but also just in life, and can certainly gain a ton more from like your story and growth through writing and journaling. So I'm extremely excited to have you on, man.
Yeah, man. It's actually funny. You know, if you remember back a long time ago, it was a while ago, we were in college, and the one thing that we were looking forward to was getting out so we didn't have to study anymore. We didn't have to read any more books. And being in the military, being in combat environments, and kind of being in the real world, I found that reading is actually very important, maybe more so than we thought it was in college. To having that competitive advantage in life, in the workplace. And so I've just discovered that over the years, partly through, you know, just coming up and finding books and starting to piece stuff together. But also I've had the opportunity to work for some amazing military leaders who were avid readers themselves and excelled in combat environments. And so I've kind of picked up that practice myself and brought it forward with me.
What was like, I don't know if you can go back to it, but what was like a defining moment and when you were like, man, I need to be reading more and this is making so much sense. Like I'm getting so much out of this. Why was I not doing it between college and said point?
Yeah, it's great. So I was actually flying across country. I went into the airport. I just was trying to find just something to keep 2005, right? So there wasn't Wi-Fi on the planes. And so I just had to keep myself busy. So I found this business book by a guy named Malcolm Gladwell. And it was one of his first books. It was called Blink. And he tells this story about this military exercise that happened in early 2000. And it pitted basically the staff across all the services were going to war against this old retired guy. And the old retired guy's name was Paul Van Riper. And at the time, the military thought, we have all this technology. It's going to allow us to see the enemy first, to decide first, to be much faster than we've ever been in the history of warfare, and be able to win our wars much quicker. Okay, and this is before September 11th. And so in this exercise, this old retired guy, Paul Van Riper, he played this rogue commander. All right, Paul was a Vietnam veteran. He was a company commander in Vietnam. He actually got shot in the stomach during one of his combat missions. And so as he sat in the hospital, he just started reading a lot. And so he recovered from that, ended up becoming a 3-star general in the Marine Corps and retired. But he had, instead of just relying on his own experiences in the Marines, he spent his entire career reading and studying and learning history. And so he was using, you know, methods from World War II, World War I, that Arabs were using in fights in the Middle East, you know, hundreds of years ago, to run circles around our military. And basically, he proved to them in the exercise that it's going to take a lot more than technology to beat our opponents. And you know, we've been at war for a while now in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so we kind of had to learn that lesson the hard way. So I read about this guy Van Riper, and I was like, that's something that I need to do with myself. And unfortunately, I was only a couple years out of college, so you know, that idea I had of you don't have to read anymore was completely shot out of the water when I read this story. And so then slowly after that, I just started, encountering leader after leader who were very impressive and knew what to do in combat situations. And like I said, I learned the practice of reading from them. There's a great way to kind of illustrate, how this works is, one of the things that how we view situations, that we view everything in metaphors, right? So when you're, when you encounter something new, normally what you'll do is you'll go back to saying it's like, right? So you'll try to compare it to a past experience. And the problem is that a lot of us just don't have a lot of experiences, especially like right out of college. And so by the act of reading, all of a sudden you're taking that narrow soda straw of it's like, and you're expanding it out to where you start having 5,000 years of it's like to rely on. And there's a great story that I love to tell people when I'm talking about reading. So in 1911, before we had, before we'd really perfected Arctic travel, there were two men, Roald Amundsen and Sir Francis Scott, and they wanted to be the very first people to reach the South Pole, right? But they had two different motivations for doing it, right? So Scott was in the British Navy, and his motivation was promotion. If he could get to the South Pole, he could get to that next rank. He was destined to become a Navy admiral, and he would go down in history as one of the greatest, naval commanders ever. The other guy was Roald Amundsen, and he was, I believe he was from Norway, and he just had a passion for Arctic travel, and he spent his entire life studying it. He went and lived in the North Pole for a little bit with Eskimos to kind of understand how they did business and what those environments were like. On the flip side, like I said, Sir Francis Scott was just about that rank and that promotion. So Scott goes down there, he doesn't read anything, and there'd already been a ton of books published already on Arctic exploration. He talked to very few people, and he just kind of went off his own experiences, in the Navy to kind of get him through this expedition. So the one thing that got the two guys that made the difference was how they planned for friction, right? So Amundsen knew that his guys were going to be tired, they were going to be hungry, the weather conditions were going to be bad, and how he stored his food provisions, because this was, I believe it was like an 1,800-mile trek. It was crazy. And they did it by foot, by the way. I almost left that part out. Amundsen knew that the conditions were going to be bad. So when he would bury food for his trek back from the South Pole, he put flags all the way around it. And that way, if his guys were off a little bit left or a little bit to the right, the chances of them bumping into these provisions were very high, right? Scott, on the other hand, because he didn't have any other experiences to go on, all he did was as he buried his provisions, he stuck a single flag in it, right? So his opportunity for failure was much higher. And so on the way back, first of all, Amundsen was the first guy to make it. And it wasn't just by hours or minutes, it was by weeks. He got to the South Pole first, got his entire team back, nobody died, all right? Scott, had some problems along the way. Like I said, was 2 weeks behind him. But on the way back, they couldn't find their provisions. And the entire team died and starved. And so we know about their story today because their diaries and journals were preserved in their tents, where they died. And so I like telling that story because I kind of feel like we have a choice in life, right? Like we can be Amundsen and we can study everything we can about human behavior, psychology, history, and like gain a better understanding of the world and the environment we're going to be operating in. Or we can choose to be Scott and just kind of muddle our way through and hope it works out in the end. And so that was one of the like as I started diving into reading, I read the book. It's called The Last Place on Earth by Roland Hunsford. I'm gonna just start throwing out books on this podcast, Drew. But
Oh, good.
anyways, but I learned about that, and that lesson just stuck with me, right? Like you got to prepare for the worst in any situation you're going into and have contingencies. And so that's just an example of me taking that lesson and taking it forward with me in planning in combat and in just training environments as well.
That's really good. I'm taking notes on my podcast here because I feel like I'm at school. So this is great. Like,
Sorry, buddy.
no, I'm like super excited. I imagine some other people on here as well are like, I can get a lot out of that. It's interesting, kind of the story you share about those two individuals. I talk about two different types of sales reps and two different types of business reps when I'm coaching other people. And let's say I ask them to ascend the mountain. That's the goal: ascend the mountain, get to the top of the mountain. I call one group of people the avalanchers. And these are people that don't think about it. They just go and they do, and they get to the top quickly. They're typically the first ones up there. They may burn a village on the way up because they were a little careless. And they're also going to be the ones that bury your inside office and the rest of your team in an avalanche because of their little regard for getting there. Now, they get there quickly. They get that patch that they're going after, but they cause a little bit of disaster on the way. And the other group is the basers. And the basers are the people that plan. They get their climbing rope, their spikes, they think about it, they walk around the mountain a few times before they decide to climb. And usually they're heading out to go ascend the mountain by the time the avalanchers are coming back down to the bar to have a drink. But they're also much more well prepared, and they don't bury their internal office or team in other disasters and other ancillary things that could be coming about. Both have a little bit of neglect. Both of them have good, decent approaches in their own ways as well. But I kind of liked your story there. I'm going to pick that up. So that's cool. Joe, I could see you being a professor one day and everybody wanting to go learn from your class. What's like if you had your choice of curriculum, or let's say if you had your choice of one book that you would take, like, and you were going to be teaching on leadership, what's the one book that you would make every one of your students buy? What's one that maybe the theme of your class that you would teach on?
I think one of them, right, would be this. So this is Epictetus. Epictetus was a first century. He was a Greek Stoic. It's an ancient philosophy, and he taught the elite in Rome. So he basically, all the parents who had 21-year-old playboys sent their sons to this guy to be taught kind of like how to live. And so throughout Epictetus's teachings, one of his students wrote all this stuff down. One of the things that you and I talked about before is how like nothing's new, right? So like everything, like popular business literature, all that stuff, like it's all been written before, and you just got to find it. And I think it's fun too, because you just realize, man, that like people don't change. So like Epictetus, he has this one thing he calls, I got to read this to you. It's called sheep, right? So his whole thing was like, don't tell me all the books you've read. Don't, just like, don't tell me, like, don't recite passages from books. Like, let me see you act this stuff out. Like, that's where the proof is. And so he would tell his students, for even the sheep do not vomit up their grass and show the shepherds how much they've eaten. But when they have internally digested the pasture, they produce externally wool and milk. Do you also show not your theorems to the uninstructed, but show the acts which come from your digestion? And so he would tell the guys, like, hey, like, if I'm asking to, like, see, like how weightlifting's working for you. And he actually said this. He goes, don't go and give me your weights. That's not what I asked. I want to see your shoulder muscles. I want to see, like, how it's actually producing something. And so that was just one of the ways that Epictetus taught. He taught people how to live, and how to live a good, virtuous life, and how to, how to take things as they happen and kind of look at what is and go off of that and quit focusing on like what could be. There's a lot of connection between Stoicism and the military. So Admiral James Stockdale, he was a pilot in Vietnam. He was shot down. He spent 8 years as a prisoner in Hanoi Hilton. 4 of those was in solitary confinement, right? He broke his leg in the landing, right? So he, just imagine, right? You get shot down. Not only do you break your leg, not only are you surrounded by North Vietnamese with guns, about to pull you into captivity. But then you're tortured, you're beaten, you're interrogated for 8 years. And then he was the highest ranking person in the Hanoi Hilton. So he had to lead everybody through that. And so one of the things that he did was he studied Epictetus before he went and became a fighter pilot. And so, he said, like, this isn't ideal, but these are the cards I'm given. So this is the hand I'm going to play. And that's just kind of how he approached his time in captivity, and eventually made it through.
How much more amazing could this world be if they operated right now with all of the uncertainty going on?
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, man, like, it's funny. So like, this is the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. He was known as one of, like, I believe there's like 5 emperors in Rome, right? Everybody else after that was like basically tore the empire apart. So Marcus Aurelius takes over, and there's a plague, right? So like, there's wars going on, there's a plague, and so every night, like, while he was on these, instead of like disappearing in Rome and like hiding out, waiting for it to be over, he led through the plague. And at night he would journal. And that's what this is. This is like his journal, his thoughts that he would write down at night. Not for like, hey, I'm going to publish my memoirs later, but they were actually for himself to kind of work through that. And there's a quote in there where he talks about, like, everybody's worried about the poison in the air. People should be worried about the poison between their ears. And so his whole thing was just like having a, strength of thought. And he could have been like, hey, it's not fair. How come all these other emperors, had relative peace in their time, and I've got a plague, I've got these wars. But he didn't. And you can see, like, once again, his writings are accessible to us today, and they're a source of strength, source of inspiration, and things that we can learn from and internalize ourselves, right? Like Epictetus the sheep, and produce good wool in our organizations.
You're like speaking with like extreme conviction today, and I feel like we're getting a lot out of this. So I'm super pumped.
Dude, I'm telling you, man, like, I've just, last couple of years, right, I've just gotten really excited because I discovered that, like, everything that we talk about, everything that we're doing today, like, you can go back, turn of the century, right? Like, you have a bad boss, like, you think it's rough on you. So this is Seneca, okay? He was a speechwriter for Nero, all right? And so, like, there's Nero burned down his, watched Rome burn. He was crazy. He had his brother killed, his mother chained up. And here's like this guy in his inner circle who's from the same school of thought as Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. And so he would write letters kind of giving life advice out. He was like the first blogger, like 2,000 years ago. And so he would just write his friends and try to help them through situations. But like, you can tell that a lot of the advice he's given is from personal experience, working in the court of Nero. And so it's just awesome, man. Like, you can either, like you said, you can either be what he called like a mountain climber and go, just muddle through it, and hopefully you don't burn the mountain down on your way up. Or, you can use these books in your base camp and kind of understand human nature a little bit better, and fortify yourself for like some of the problems that you're going to be facing at work.
Man, so this is really good. Now I've got like a list of books that I need to go read because I need to get my schooling on. This is great.
Yeah. So it's not just reading. So that's the other thing, Drew, is like, I don't just read, because like there's a thing called the forgetting curve. And what that is as soon as you read something, you basically forget 75% of it in the next like 24, 48 hours. And as time goes on, you actually forget it more. So you have to develop a system for remembering what you read. So one of the things that I do is every time I pick up a book, I have a pen and a highlighter handy. And I mark passages in the book with ideas. And another good aspect of reading that people don't realize is it drives reflection. So as you're reading about these experiences, you know, whether they're 2,000 years old or whether they're in Antarctica in 1911, you start seeing connections from what you're facing today or something you faced before. And so reading drives reflection. And so the other thing I keep with me is a small notebook, which is really the genesis of the website. In the military, they issue you green notebooks, and that's what you keep your notes in. But I use mine for reflection as well. And so the website that I started 7 years ago is about, you know, those lessons, hard-earned lessons that I've captured in notebooks and that other leaders from across the world, military and militaries from around the world have captured in theirs, and then sharing them for others to learn from. So this is a 3x5 moleskin that I carry around with me. And I mean, you can see, man, like it's filled with notes, with reflections. And so after I finish a book, I'll wait a little bit, and then I'll go back through and I'll just focus on the highlights. And I'll maybe copy some passages down. Another great quote from Seneca was, he says, "We should hunt out the helpful pieces of teaching and the spirited, noble-minded sayings, which are capable of immediate practical application, not some far-fetched or archaic expressions or random metaphors or figures of speech, but we should learn them so well that the words become works." And I love that last part, that we learn them so well that our words become works. And so with my notebook, I write down the highlights from the books, my reflections. And then even as I'm doing that, I'm coming up with more ideas of, hey, maybe this is something I should work on, or this is something I'll do better next time when I'm in one of these situations. And I constantly review my notebooks. I have a stack here in my desk of old notebooks that I continually go through. And so that way I become familiar enough with the books I'm reading that hopefully they start showing through in how I lead others and how I interact with other people.
So I want you to brag about yourself for a minute. And sorry to put you on the spot, but the green notebook that you're the author of, and you're the blog writer on, and the main contributor. So this has reached thousands and thousands and thousands of people, all the way from entry-level privates in the military to generals. What's one of the best compliments you've ever received from somebody that's had the ability or the moment to experience your writings?
I think I got an email one time from an Air Force colonel who told me that a post that I had written on performance counseling, you know, providing feedback to others, completely changed the way he gave feedback to his subordinates. And the one thing I think, like, you know, that I've learned from reading and that I've learned from my own experiences is that, like, we all leave a leadership wake, right? But like, we kind of determine how big that wake is and how powerful it is. And so for me, like, one of the ways in which I have, like, kind of left a wake or left a legacy in the Army is through writing, and it's helping others. So it's been, and two, like it's two things. Like, one, it forces me to reflect, to think through things, and to grow. And then two, like, it just it's a great way to, like, crystallize your thoughts on something, you know, and to kind of give back and share so other people don't make the same mistake that you did.
So through giving back from your writing, your journaling, and reading, like, what's one main piece of growth you've seen in yourself over the past 20? I mean, Joe, you and I have known each other for 20 years, and I could share plenty of stories from college.
Yeah.
I'm super proud of where you are right now, but yeah. I mean, I think back to where we were 20 years ago, and neither one of us would have expected for either of us to be where we are in our respective lives now. What's one achievement where you're like, man, that was it. I'm proud of that. That's one thing that I got that you know is a wonderful badge of honor.
Yeah, I think the ability to, you know, I've had the opportunity to advise people who have been in, you know, that were in the military when you and I were in grade school. that are now senior leaders in the military. And I think for me, just being able to help them lead by helping them with writing, helping them with communication, has been, it's been amazing, like to do that, when they're outranked me by several ranks. And that a lot of people that are in the position that I've been in are typically 5 to 6 years older than me. And I attribute that competitive advantage that I've had to reading. And then another piece of it too is I've had a lot of younger guys that I've served with over the years that were hard chargers and were just like me, like reading wasn't important to them because they just got out of college and everything. And as we've had conversations, kind of like you and I are talking now, to hear them come back like a year or two later and say, hey, sir, like I've adopted the practice of reading, and it's completely changed how I lead my soldiers. And so thank you for sitting down and having a conversation with me for 5 minutes on that topic.
What's one way that you lead differently now because of your experiences versus when you were a first, second lieutenant, maybe even an early captain? So your first few years, you were getting some command, getting some control. You were starting to lead people. What's one way that you lead differently now based on experiences you've had through this writing and this journaling and just overall?
I think one thing is understanding that like the friction is going to happen in any organization you're in. Like you in your mind, you think things are going to go a certain way, and they don't. And the problem I see with a lot of leaders is that when reality doesn't meet their expectations, they start losing their mind and they start losing their composure and they start losing the ability to think clearly about the next steps on how to get the whatever project it is back on track. And so I think for me, like one of the things that reading has made me is a lot more patient because I understand that that's just a part of life. And then the other thing too is just the importance of people. Like, sometimes we just get so wrapped up in data and numbers, and we forget that like organizations are made up of people. And so, one of the things that history is full of is people that invested in people to do great. Like just a quick story. So there's a guy from World War I, and he was General Pershing's chief of staff. General Pershing was in charge of the Allied Expeditionary Forces in Europe, and his name was Fox Connor. And Fox Connor had this ability to spot talent and cultivate it. And so there were 3 young officers that he kind of took under his wing. One was George Marshall, and he would sit over in World War I and just have conversations with Marshall about kind of what was going on. The second one, he met this guy on a train, and he knew that his like ego would get this guy in trouble. So he tried to like work with him a little bit, but they also shared a fascination for tanks. And so they became very close, and that was Patton. And then the third guy was this kind of like this guy who was a friend of Patton's who, was going nowhere in the Army, and he wasn't a reader. And so Fox Connor took him under his wing, brought him to Panama with him, and they would walk every day. He'd just give him reading assignments. Hey, I want you to read this. I want you to talk to me about it. And just basically gave this guy like a love of learning. And that was Eisenhower. And so, so you see that like nobody like outside of military circles has ever heard of the name Fox Connor, but they've heard the names of the other 3 guys. And so you never know when the person you're investing in is going to be an Eisenhower, a Patton, or a Marshall, and is just really going to like lead positive change, somewhere down the road. And so that's just a quick example of I think something that I've just picked up from reading and that I think is very important.
Man, this just keeps getting better. I don't want it to end. I always ask this question of my guests though, and kind of put you on the spot, but talk to us about a time where you were failing at something, or you failed before, you had a weakness in a specific area or category, what you did to get through that, get past it, what it was that you did to get past it, and what the positive outcome was afterwards. I think this is such a crucial part of the show, because everybody that's watching right now is watching to learn from you and advance themselves in whatever respective career that they have. And they're getting some nuggets of truth from you, but they know they're going to step into a failure, or they currently may be failing at the same thing. So one example here could be helping a lot of people.
Yeah. So for me, it was a pretty big failure. So early on in my career, everything was going well. You know, I was like, I was doing really well in the organizations I was serving in. And I went to a military school. They call it the master's version of Ranger School. And so I went to this school. It was a multi-week course. You know, I'm walking heavy rucksack in the hills of Fort Benning, and I failed it. I failed this course, and I realized. So first thing is it took my ego down a notch, right? So like sometimes our egos get a little bit ahead of us, and so like I learned that humility is very important. The second thing is I confuse the trappings of success with like all the stuff all the hard work, all the mundane stuff it takes to get there, right? So like there's a great quote I just read the other day from this coach who said that parents would come to him asking how they can turn their 13 and 14-year-olds into like Olympians today, like Michael Phelps, forgetting that maybe Michael Phelps wasn't like their kid. You know, that Michael Phelps was a completely different person at 13 and 14 years old. And so like, you know, he went through a lot of, you know, a lot of hard work and a lot of, you know, just monotony as far as being able to get to that point. So I learned the importance of taking a step back and focusing on the stuff that the day-to-day stuff, the stuff that like you have to do when nobody's looking to make yourself better, and that I can't just walk into a situation and take it for granted, that I'm going to excel in it. So for me, those were two big things. And then the last one, I said, I'm never going to fail a course again. And so since then I haven't, but that was for me, it was a perfect, you know, knock off a pedestal at an early age to learn some very valuable lessons that I've continued to carry forward with me today.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. So as we kind of start to wrap up here, if you have one nugget of wisdom you could share with everybody, one other piece of advice from your experiences,
Yeah,
what would it be?
I would say that, you know, in today's world, right, like everything is built around distracting us, right? We have our cell phones with our notifications. You know, I know for myself personally, I have multiple social media feeds that I manage. You know, I've got, you know, 2,000 channels, I think, on the TV. I've got an Apple box with, you know, on demand for all those channels. And so I think it's very easy for us to like get caught up in the world and not just kind of take a step back and find quiet, find solitude, and find some reflection. So if there's anything I'd say is try to like find stillness out there and look for those moments where you can actually reflect, where you can kind of be still with yourself and take those opportunities, because the world's not going to give them to you, man. They're just going to keep taking them away.
That's fantastic. Guys, you're hearing from Joe Byerly on Culture Bust. Joe, thanks so much for being on the show, my man. Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Drew.